Hi there and welcome along. Today we're looking at two cinemas that once stood proud in the town of Lowestoft in Suffolk in the UK. The Palace because it was huge and very different, and then the Ideal Cinema which was short-lived, and there is little info or pictures of it remaining. It is virtually lost to time. But with the help of the Cinema and Theatre Association, we have scraped up everything we could find, which, to be honest, isn't much. But nonetheless, it is a record of its very existence. So, let's get underway. Located in Lowestoft, Suffolk, at the northern end of Royal Plain, the Palace Cinema was built on the site of the disused Royal Stables, and part of the original building for the stables was retained. The Palace was built inside what remained of the old stables and occupied the open arena in the centre. Much of the old stables remained around the cinema, and faint lettering could be seen on one of the outside walls advertising horses for hire. The Palace Cinema was opened on July the 14th, 1913 with Les Miserables, the first feature-length French film adaptation of the story. The Palace seated 1,600 in stalls and balcony, but we don't know what equipment was installed in those heady early days. Now the Palace had two entrances, one a splendid facade facing the sea, and at the rear another, although I don't really know why. Answers, if you have any, in the comments below. Here's a picture or two of that rear entrance. They say that it was an odd experience to walk out of one of the side exits of the Palace to find yourself in one of the old horse stalls. In 1930 the building was refurbished and a BTH sound system was installed. The first talkie screened was Janet Gaynor in Sunny Side Up. The film featured the hit song If I Had a Talking Picture of You. The cinema now also boasted a cafe and a dance hall. Now let's have a look at the Palace magazine from 1934, courtesy of the Cinema and Theatre Association. In the mid-1950s, the Palace Cinema was the first in Lowestoft to be equipped with CinemaScope, opening with Richard Burton in The Robe. Mrs. Pittham was a relief cashier and usherette in the 50s, and in an article in the local paper in 1987 she said, "I loved it, queues right round the corner towards Notley's auction rooms and Mr. Pell's the doorman shouting 2 1 and 9s or whatever. It was a great life. I am in the middle of the photo standing on a stool which makes me look taller than the rest of them. In fact, I'm only 4'11", or maybe 4'10", but when I got up on my cashier's stool, it put me up in the world. I loved it because I was as big as the next, till I had to climb off and go to the office to get change. I could go on all day about those happy days." She continued, "The staff at the Palace were a happy lot, and I put it down to the fact that they saw all the films for nothing. With 3 changes of programme each week, that was 6 films. And as well as cinema staff, there were ordinary people who went to the Palace nearly every night of the week, including Sundays." Although there were 5 cinemas pulling in the crowds in the 1950s in Lowestoft, the Odeon, Hippodrome, Palace, the Grand and the Marina or ABC. In the 1930s there were no fewer than 9. The other 4 being the Public Hall, being the largest of the small fry, the Regent at the bottom end of the High Street, the Ideal in Norwich Road and the Pakefield Cinema in St George's Road. Later, Mrs. Pittham went on to be relief cashier at the Odeon. The Palace was the first cinema in Lowestoft to have stereophonic sound, and when Frank Sinatra sang the theme song from 3 Coins in the Fountain, the audience were apparently spellbound. Mr. Chittlebur, one-time manager of the Palace, used to keep a large tin of Quality Street on his desk, and from time to time would go back and forth into the foyer, distributing them. In the early 1960s, bingo was tried out on certain evenings during the week, and in 1965-66, due to ever-falling attendances, the cinema changed over to full-time bingo. But that only lasted until the night of July the 16th, 1966, when the building suffered a devastating fire which completely gutted the premises. The building remained empty and unused for almost 5 years until it was eventually demolished, with it the old royal stables and mews, which had been there for 100 years. The demolition was supervised by architects Piper and Wally, and a spokesman said at the time that there were currently no plans for future development of the site. The Palace site, an island with the main A12 trunk road running on each side of it, would indeed be a difficult one to develop. Let's divert for a while to nearby Galston-on-Sea, where a cinema acquired the name Lousy Quarters by many of its patrons. Not at all a reflection on the quality of the cinema, but rather due to a particular name change. The cinema in Beach Road had many names over the years. After opening in 1913 as Filmland, it later became the Playhouse, the Palace and the Scala, when the owner, for some reason known only to him, changed the name to the Louis XIV. I might have said that wrong, but I'll put it on the screen so you can all see. The patrons, not wanting to get their tongues around that name, soon started calling it the Lousy Quarters, and although that may have made the owner think about another name change, that name actually stayed. Now let's look at cinema number 2 in Lowestoft, The Ideal. It is reported to have been started by a young man called Mr. Bird in a net store in Hervey Street before moving to the old chapel in Norwich Road. Originally, it was thought to be a 16mm setup. The chapel cinema closed after a while and was converted properly, according to the local council minutes of the 8th of April 1936, when a licence was applied for by the Ideal Cinema Lowestoft Limited. This was granted subject to the borough surveyor being satisfied that the condition of said premises warranted the issue of such a licence. The Ideal was to reopen on the 6th of April, according to an advert in the Lowestoft Journal on the 4th of April, which said, "New sound, seats, comfort and pictures." The film on Monday the 6th being Bright Eyes, starring Shirley Temple, and on Thursday, Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch, starring Pauline Lord and Zazu Pitts. A report in the same issue said that the Ideal was now under entirely new ownership. It has been redecorated in the modern style by London theatre specialists and has an entirely new full-size projector and sound by British Thompson Houston installed, and a new larger screen. Little more is advertised afterwards. Kelly's Directory of 1937 states that A.G. Maguire was manager and that the owner was operating from Baxter Gate in Whitby. Little is known of this cinema after 1938, although the Kinney Yearbook for 1940 retains an entry in which local sources were saying that it was closed. The building remained in another use but was bricked up by the 1980s. It was eventually demolished and a house was built on the site. That's about it for this one. I hope you liked this brief look at a couple of the cinemas in Lowestoft. Next up, we're looking at the Grand and the Cosy Corner in Lowestoft, which later changed its name to the Regent. Till then, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, be good to each other, and as usual, see you soon. Ta-da!